The shop owner sat quietly behind the counter, sparing us nary a glance as we continued to browse through the little oddities and trinkets that littered the shelves of his store. I was silently grateful for his lack of attention. I hated when shopkeepers or retail assistants followed me around closely, fussing over everything I look at. I understand, of course, that everyone needs to make a living, that they may have to do these things. Perhaps it's a shop rule to not leave customers alone. But I can't help but feel frazzled and pressured, and I'd often choose to just leave instead. This shop was the stuff of my dreams. Crystals of various colours, quaint little antique lamps, oddly shaped teapots, pretty metal boxes, old jewellery, and all kinds of odds and ends were on display. For a semi-hoarder like myself, this shop was full of potential acquisitions, ready to be placed on my already brimming display shelves at home, or, more likely, to end up packed in a box in the storage area. But still, the temporary joy of bringing something beautiful and unique home, that was enough. Jason, my boyfriend, would probably nag at me about buying more things to add to our already crowded home. But he would probably also get something for himself. He was, despite his denial, also somewhat of a hoarder, though to a much lesser extent than I was. We made our way to the back of the store, and saw a row of dolls lining the shelves. They were cute little round dolls, which seemed to resemble a stern-looking man without limbs. Thick eyebrows were drawn on, and intricate black lines were inked on the face. The eyes were large white circles, without any pupils drawn on. Each doll had a different coloured robe painted on. One was painted red, with golden stripes, and what looked like a Chinese or Japanese word painted at the front. Another was painted yellow all around, with little squiggly red lines. One was slicked a dark green, with silver stripes. They all had a word painted on the front. These look interesting, I said, picking one up and rotating it in my hand to look it over. It seemed to be made of paper mache or some other lightweight material.
Why don't they have eyes?
My partner asked. A rustling sound came from the counter. The shop owner was standing up and smiling. He walked over to us and said, "I see you found them wishing dolls." Wishing dolls? I asked, not letting go of the one I was holding. I felt an affinity for it. "Yeah, these are Japanese wishing dolls. You make a wish, colour in the pupil for one eye. Then when the wish comes true, you colour in the other one." Cool. Do they help with making wishes come true? I asked, holding the little doll tighter in my grip. "Yeah, they're supposed to help you reach your goals. Bring you good luck." Jason saw the glint in my eye and laughed.
You're definitely getting this, aren't you?
I almost nodded, then remembered the basic purchase strategies. I don't know. I'm thinking about it. I can't afford anything too expensive. The shop owner grinned. "It's just $5. I'm not making a profit off these at all. Just helping a friend sell some of his stuff from his travels." Oh yeah, this little guy is mine, I thought.
Which one of them is the most powerful?
My boyfriend asked, picking up a few of the others one by one, inspecting them closely. "Oh, powerful," the shop owner said, stroking his chin. "I know the one for you." He walked to another shelf altogether, reached up to the highest shelf, and grabbed a metal box down. It was rusted all over, and laced with a thick layer of dust. It looked at odds with the other items in the store. The display tended to be a little haphazard, but most items were well taken care of, clean, and definitely frequently dusted. He pulled out a key that was stuck to the bottom of the box and unlocked it. He gently opened the lid as we stared with increasing curiosity. There was another Japanese-looking doll inside, but this one was almost completely different from the other dolls. This one had limbs, for one. It also seemed to be in the form of a girl, with what looked like sewn-on black hair, cut into straight bangs in the front, and a neat straight cut across at the back. The doll was wearing an actual robe, made of purple fabric. Her eyes, too, were white, without pupils. I had to suppress the shudder that went up my spine. She looked a little creepy without her pupils and her blank expression. The black hair unnerved me too. "Is that real human hair?" I asked. The shop owner smiled, still holding the doll gently. "Yes, I think so, at least." He set the doll down in front of my boyfriend. "Anyway, she's the most powerful doll there is, for granting wishes." Jason raised an eyebrow.
"How much for her?"
$10, which is a great bargain," the shop owner said confidently.
"Alright, we'll grab these two,"
my boyfriend said, pointing to the round doll in my hands and the creepy girl doll. He pulled out a 10 as I found my $5. "Awesome. May all your wishes come true," the shop owner said, pocketing our cash and pulling out a paper bag to pack the dolls in.
"I sure hope so,"
Jason said. I looked at him, wondering what wish he had that led to that flicker of steely determination on his face. Once we were home, we found the box of markers that we had gathered over the years, each picking out a black one. We drew in one of the pupils on our respective dolls. As I drew mine, I wished for my article to be published in the online journal that I'd been aiming for. I figured it wasn't too much to wish for, and maybe the little doll would really help me out. "What did you wish for?" I asked as Jason looked carefully at the pupil he had drawn on his doll.
"It's a secret,"
he said, smiling cheekily. Fine. Anyway, good luck, whatever it is." I don't know if it's the doll, but I got it. My article was published, with my name in the byline. I was grinning ear to ear as I told Jason about it. He was happy enough for me, but I could see him staring at his doll, and I knew he was thinking about his own wish. "Still hasn't come true?" I asked, reining in my happiness, trying to be sensitive. He frowned, then shrugged, and smiled.
"I'm sure it will soon."
When I was alone, I drew in the other pupil on the doll and replaced it on the shelf, smiling fondly at it. It seemed like a kindly entity looking over us. "Thanks for making my wish come true," I whispered, patting it on the head. I looked over at Jason's doll. Annabelle. I had secretly named her in my head. She seemed creepy enough to match the name. "Please make his wish come true too, Anna," I said, reaching out a hand to touch her, but quickly changing my mind. She still made me uncomfortable. I stared at her for a moment more, then looked away, then immediately looked back again. Something seemed different about her. I walked from side to side, trying to figure out what was different. Was it her pose? Did she get sun-bleached? Nothing seemed to have changed that much, not that I could tell. Her hair. I realized, a chill dripping down my spine. Her hair was longer. I shook my head. I must have been imagining things. I looked again at her hair. It not only seemed longer, but it was also no longer the neat straight cut across that it used to be. It seemed almost layered. Unable to suppress the shudder that crept up my spine, I turned away from her and went back to the bedroom, deciding to bury my discomfort under a mountain of work. I woke up at night to the sound of whispers. I reached out and realized that Jason wasn't in bed. Rubbing my sleep-addled eyes, I stepped quietly out of bed. I didn't know why I was being so stealthy, but I just felt like I needed to be. I was also suddenly a little bit worried about intruders. I tiptoed to the door, which was already open a crack. I pulled it further open and stuck my head out. It was Jason's voice, I realized, and felt a rush of relief. He was probably having a late-night work call with his crazy boss. That man knew no boundaries. Then I heard a response. A girl's voice. A girl's voice right in the home. I felt a mix of hurt and anxiety fill my heart. Why was there a girl in our home? I pricked my ears to hear better. She knows. She stared at me, at my hair. Cut it for me. Make it straight. The voice was saying.
She didn't say anything to me. I'm sure she doesn't know.
Jason replied. You know she can't find out. The voice said in a threatening tone.
I know. I'll make sure she doesn't. But yes, I'll cut your hair. Let me go get the scissors.
I ducked back behind the door as he walked by to get the scissors from the kitchen. My heart was pounding. It sounded like he was talking to Annabelle. But it couldn't be. But I heard her voice too. But yet, it couldn't be. I was tempted to run out and see what he was up to exactly. But at the same time, I felt frozen with indecision. What if there was another girl? But why would a random girl talk about me staring at her hair? What if he was going mad, speaking for both himself and the doll? Then what do I do? What if, God forbid, the doll was really speaking? What would it do? What would I do? With those thoughts in my head, I snuck back into bed and shut my eyes, trying to force myself into sleep. I must have fallen asleep before Jason got back into bed. I woke up the next day and the moment Jason was in the bathroom, I walked out to Jason's doll. Bracing myself, I picked her up and turned her over. Her hair was neat at the back again, shorter than it was yesterday. It was a perfect straight cut, no longer the layered texture it was just the night before. I placed her back on the shelf. She seemed to stare right at me with her one pupil. I swore she smiled. Backing away, tense with a nameless terror that wrapped itself around me. I didn't hear Jason calling out to me until he opened the bathroom door.
"Did you hear me? I was asking if you're headed out today."
I looked at him, his words taking a while to settle in my head. "Oh, yes, definitely. I'm going out," I said. There was no way I was staying home alone with that doll while Jason was out for work. I need to work outside. I'm not really inspired at home these days. I made the feeble excuse, for some reason wanting to convince the doll that I wasn't leaving because of her. I grabbed my laptop and packed quickly, making sure to leave at the same time Jason did, not wanting to have to spend any time alone with Annabelle. I would talk to him about what I heard tonight, I decided. I got home around dinner time and walked into the house filled with the fragrance of burning candles. I smiled, knowing that Jason had likely prepared a surprise date night at home for me. Indeed, there was a feast set up at the table. The lights were dimmed, and candles burned romantically in the middle of the table. I smiled as he beamed at me, gesturing to the seat before him.
"I got us all food,"
he said. I walked over, then froze on the spot. I just stared in disbelief for a long moment, my heart thudding louder and louder in my chest. He had placed his doll at the table too, on the other seat. Jason saw the look on my face and laughed, a little too jovially.
"There's a reason she's here, babe,"
he said, grinning. He picked her up and turned her to face me. Her other pupil was drawn in now. She had both pupils, and now both eyes seemed to pierce straight into my soul.
"My wish came true,"
he announced, loudly, and Annabelle seemed to nod along with his words. He probably made her nod, I convinced myself. "Oh," I finally found my voice. "What was your wish?" He continued to grin widely.
"Mike is out. We're getting a new boss. Now I can finally get the promotion he's been blocking."
His voice held joy and a touch of manic glee. "Mike is out?" Mike is a name often spoken in our household, paired with vehement insults. Mike has been the bane of Jason's life for the past few years. Temperamental, selfish, underhanded. He had stolen Jason's credit so often and hurled so many derogatory insults at Jason that I honestly couldn't keep track. He seemed to trip Jason up at every turn.
"Yeah, he...
Here, Jason darted a nervous glance at his doll.
had a heart attack this morning. He's in the hospital. They're not sure if he's going to make it. Anyway, by the end of work, the higher-ups had already sent out a notice
that someone else will be hired to step in for him. I raised my eyebrows, a little surprised at the glee that infused his voice. Sure, Mike was an ass, but I was still a little unnerved at Jason's undisguised cheer. I thought there would be a little compassion or discomfort on his part at his boss having had a heart attack. I reminded myself of how much Jason had suffered under Mike and tried to understand why he would be rejoicing. It took a bit of mental gymnastics, but I could soon really understand and empathize with how he felt. Congrats, I guess, I said, and went to give him a hug. There was a sharp pain on my chest, and I backed away, startled. The doll was still in his arms when we hugged. I looked down at my chest to see a little tear in my shirt and droplets of blood oozing from a shallow gash below my left collarbone. What the hell? I asked. Jason stared at Annabelle, and I swear, he shook his head at her. Oh, shit, babe. You must have nicked it on a sharp part of her, he said, sounding unconvinced himself. A sharp part of her? I glared at the doll. What part of her is sharp? Then I caught sight of the little dash of red on her lips. I reached forward, horrified, but unable to stop myself. I swiped my finger across the doll's lips, half expecting her to snap at my fingers. She didn't move, and I looked at my finger. A drop of blood was on it. Did she bite me just now? Was I losing it? Jason, we need to talk. Jason looked at me, a strange expression on his face. He seemed to know what was coming, but to also not want to have to deal with it. Then he sighed and gestured for me to sit down. Could you put her away, please? I don't want her here, I said, as firmly as I could manage. He sighed heavily, then carefully placed her back on the shelf before sitting back down at the table. What's wrong? He asked, sounding resigned and defensive. I don't like that doll. Can we get rid of her? I got straight to the point, unable to suppress my feelings anymore. He seemed startled at my directness. He threw a nervous glance behind me, probably at the doll. Don't say that, he whispered. I don't like her. I don't want her here, Jason. I understand your wish came true, but I don't want her in the house. Jason's face fell, and he made a shushing motion. I'm not going to... Before I could finish my sentence, I heard a thud behind me. I jumped up and spun around. Annabelle was on the ground. I backed away, towards the door. Oh, damn. I must have placed her too close to the edge. Sorry. My bad, Jason said, running over to pick her up. I knew that was a lie. I had watched him place her securely at the back of the shelf. I gotta go, Jason. I gotta get out of here. Come with me, please. I stared at him, pleading with my eyes. I can't, babe. I need to stay here, he said, avoiding my eyes. I heard you last night, Jason. You were talking to her. I'm scared. Can we leave?
You heard me.
He seemed alarmed.
Did you hear her?
I nodded.
That was just me,
he said, the words tumbling out of his mouth as I watched him panic.
I was pretending to be her. I was bored. I was, just playing with dolls. Like everyone did.
When they were kids, Jason. And it wasn't your voice. I know it wasn't. Honestly, I didn't know that. But I wanted to see how he'd react. His face fell.
You shouldn't have said that, babe.
Why? I said, inching towards the door. Because now you can't go. A cold voice came from the ground. The same voice I had heard speaking to Jason last night. I looked down. Annabelle was staring right up at me. I screamed and tried to make a run for the door. That thing scuttled forward in a flash, its dull limbs making a gut-twisting clattering sound as they made contact with the ground. The doll stood between me and the front door. Terrified, and having lost the last ounce of composure I had, I made a mad dash for the bedroom door instead, and slammed it shut behind me as I heard the doll clatter up to the door.
Don't hurt her!
I could hear Jason yelling at the doll. Fuck! I yelled, switching the lights on and locking the door. I stepped back from the door as the pounding began. The pounding that was near the bottom of the door. The doll was banging on the door. The door shook and juddered as the pounding went on. But it was so small. How did it hit the door this hard? The pounding stopped after a while, and I heard hushed, furious whispers. I couldn't make out much, but I think Jason was talking her down. I needed to call for help. I checked in my pocket, then realized that my phone was on the dinner table outside, and we had no landline, no spare phone in here. I huddled next to the door, holding the ceramic humidifier in my hand as a weapon. Then the hushed whispers stopped. I pressed my ear to the door and realized from the sounds outside that Jason was packing his bag.
I'll be back tomorrow, okay?
He called out. I didn't dare to reply.
Please, don't do anything stupid. Just keep calm. Everything is under control, okay?
He called out again. I didn't make a sound. I heard a sigh, and then heard the front door open. Was he leaving? He better be bringing that doll with him. A loud clattering sound swooped from the front door to the bedroom door, and I stepped away, holding the humidifier high above my head, ready to smash it down if the door opened. I'll never leave his side. That creepy, overly feminine voice floated through the door. Then the loud clattering went in the direction of the front door, and the front door closed. I heard Jason locking the front door. I felt the tightness within loosen a little as silence ensued. Jason didn't come back that night, and the next morning he was still not home. Neither was Annabelle. I couldn't call the police. No one would believe me. I didn't know what to do, if I should stay or move out. Jason hadn't answered any of his calls. I needed to stay calm. But her voice kept ringing in my head, and I kept imagining her glassy eyes as she said it. I'll never leave his side.
Hello, Sinister listeners. If you've enjoyed this story, then you'll find all the author's information in the description below. For more content, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to succumb to the sinister.